Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here to speak to you today. Appreciate the Ranking Member Cole and the entire Rules Committee. Can you hear me okay, Mr. Chairman? Very good, thank you. I'm here on behalf of the Science Committee Republicans to express our frustration with the process that got us here today. At nearly 3,000 pages, H.R. 4521 is simply a partisan package tossed together by Democratic leadership behind closed doors with zero, and let me say zero, Republican input. This is a stark contrast to the process we undertook at the Science Committee. Chairwoman Johnson actually alluded to it, to develop thoughtful, bipartisan legislation to increase our investment in basic research, to spur private sector innovation, and to secure, yes, as she pointed out, to secure our nation's leadership in R&D. For example, as the ranking member of the Energy Subcommittee, we worked across the aisle to develop consensus legislation to authorize the important work of the Department of Energy Office of Science and our country's national labs. I would venture to say that the chairman of the subcommittee, Mr. Bowman, and I have very different views, political views on most policy issues. Yet, we were able to come together to prioritize the important basic research which is conducted at DOE. The result is the DOE Science for the Future Act, which passed on the House floor with 351 votes, Mr. Chairman. And that's just one example of the dozen bipartisan House Science Committee passed bills that are included in this package. Unfortunately, crammed alongside this bipartisan competitiveness legislation are billions of dollars in partisan spending on controversial international climate slush funds. Yes, you heard me correct, slush funds. Also, anti-competitive pro-union mandates, as well as skewed trade provisions, just to name a few. The speaker also managed to contaminate badly needed legislation that we had to advance American competitiveness, ruining years of bipartisan work to develop and pass what would have been, what is, and should be comprehensive legislation to advance our nation's innovation and its capabilities. Democrat leadership has allowed only 3 days to read, evaluate, and offer amendments to the nearly 3,000 pages of what we see as unorganized policy. Despite the short turnaround, as you well know, Mr. Chairman, over 550 amendments have been submitted. Over half, over half by the Democrats, I'd point out. Frankly, the sheer number of amendments reflects what happens when rank and file members on both sides of the aisle are not given the opportunity to legislate. I don't know, how about in their committees they're assigned to for this particular task? Is also what happens when the Speaker's office twists around good legislation and contaminates it with messaging bills to appease the extreme leftists in her caucus. I have submitted an amendment in collaboration with Mr. McKinley from West Virginia to address one of these messaging issues. This bill gives all sorts of authorities for the United States to assist and guide other countries in the development of energy production, Mr. Chairman. Aside from its questionable relevance to China, the problem is that this bill is explicit that the assistance must exclude, that's right, exclude fossil fuels. And folks, I think we all know for a developing country to really develop, they need two things: clean water and a stable fuel supply. They need energy, and there's nothing more stable than fossil fuels. There's a whole host of problems with the sentiment that thinks we have to exclude fossil fuels from those other nations. First and foremost, we must remember fossil fuels account for 84% of the world's energy. Flipping that switch off, that's not going to help developing countries. It's only going to devastate them. Second, some of my Democratic friends can't seem to wrap their heads around the idea that fossil fuels can be clean. Fossil fuels are not the enemy. It's the methane and the gas that comes out of improper production of fossil fuels. That's the enemy. Carbon capture and sequestration can be retrofitted to existing power and industrial plants, allowing us to capture almost 17 years worth of annual emission. Mr. Chairman, I can go on and on and on, but I want to make the case that this is really not right what's happening, that we could do this a lot better if we worked in a bipartisan manner. There's ways we could help these countries. There are ways that we could actually focus on China and being sure that American is in the leader's seat and not all these other issues that the speaker has tossed in at the last minute. And Mr. Chairman, thank you for your indulgence, and I yield back.
Thank you.